Have you ever walked into a negotiation, a meeting, a deal, fully prepared, fully informed, knowing your numbers and your position and your ask, and still felt something go wrong that you could not explain afterward? Not a mistake you made, not a better offer from a competitor, not a change in the market, something subtler than all of those. A conversation that turned in a direction you did not anticipate. A partner who seemed aligned and then pulled back for reasons that were never made fully clear. A handshake that felt solid and then dissolved into silence over the following days. You have done everything right on the surface, and the result did not follow. Sit with that for a moment, because what I am about to share is the explanation that no business school, no negotiation coach, and no financial advisor has ever given you. And it is the explanation that a specific tradition of people, a people whose commercial history is among the most studied and most confounding in the entire record of human economic activity, carried inside every deal they entered, quietly, precisely, before a single number was spoken. There are four specific words, drawn from the oldest living wisdom tradition on earth, that a significant portion of the most successful Jewish merchants, financiers, and business builders in documented history spoke, silently or aloud, before entering every consequential business interaction. Not as superstition, not as ritual performance for the sake of tradition, as a precise technology of consciousness that reoriented their internal state, their intention, and their relationship to the outcome of the deal before the deal began. I am Rabbi Naomi, and I have spent 32 years inside the texts of Jewish wisdom, the Torah, the Talmud, the Zohar, the responsa literature, the ethical and mystical writings of the great teachers across 2,000 years of documented tradition. I have also spent those 32 years in pastoral work, in the homes and businesses and lives of real people navigating real financial decisions. And what I can tell you with complete confidence is this: the 4 words I am going to share with you today are not a trick. They are not a mantra in the shallow modern sense. They are the compressed form of a complete philosophy of business, a philosophy that views every commercial transaction not merely as an exchange of value between two parties, but as a spiritual event with consequences that extend far beyond the contract. If you stay with me until I have taught you all 4, and I mean all 4, because the 4th is the one that changes everything, and it is the one I save for last, you will never enter a business interaction the same way again. Not because I have convinced you of something, because you will have understood something that cannot be unfelt once it is felt. Before we go any further, type the words, "I am ready to negotiate differently," in the comments right now. That phrase is not accidental. Negotiation is the word most people use for the process of getting what they want from another person. What I am going to show you today is that the most successful deal-makers in the tradition I study understood negotiation as something completely different. And that difference is why their results were completely different. Type it now, declare it, and then stay with me. Here is the myth I want to dismantle first, because until it is dismantled, the teaching cannot land properly. The myth is this: that the outcome of a business deal is determined primarily by the information, leverage, and preparation you bring into the room. This is the foundational assumption of every negotiation course, every deal-making book, every MBA program that has ever addressed the subject. Information plus leverage plus preparation equals outcome. And it is not wrong exactly. Those things matter. But it is catastrophically incomplete. And the incompleteness is not a small gap. It is the gap between a person who does deals and a person whose deals build something that lasts. Because information changes, leverage shifts, preparation can be outmaneuvered. What does not shift, what cannot be outmaneuvered, what holds when every external variable moves against you, is the internal condition you brought into the room before any of those variables existed. And the 4 words I am going to teach you are the precise instrument by which the great Jewish dealmakers of history calibrated that internal condition every time, without exception, before the conversation began. Now let me tell you about a man whose name you may know, but whose inner practice you almost certainly do not. Sigmund Warburg, the 20th century banker who built S.G. Warburg and Company from a single London office into one of the most influential investment banks in post-war Europe, was known among his peers and his competitors as a man whose instincts in a deal were almost uncanny. He had a quality of perception in a room that other bankers found difficult to account for. He saw things in a negotiation that others did not see. He read people with a precision that was remarked upon again and again by those who worked with him and against him. What was less publicly known, but documented in the biographical accounts of people who worked closely with him, was that Warburg maintained a disciplined inner practice before every significant meeting. He was a deeply educated man in the Jewish tradition, not an observant man in the conventional religious sense, but a man who had internalized the ethical and philosophical framework of that tradition at a serious level. And the practice he maintained before consequential meetings was a practice of internal orientation, of asking himself deliberately and precisely a set of questions that recalibrated his relationship to the transaction before it began. Not questions about the deal, questions about himself, about his intention, about what he was actually bringing into the room. The 4 words I am going to teach you are the compressed form of exactly that kind of recalibration. They are 4 words that, when spoken with genuine intention before a business interaction, ask the 4 questions that the tradition identified as the determinative questions, the ones whose answers shape the energy you carry into the room more decisively than any preparation you have done outside it. Here is the first word. The Hebrew word is emet. It means truth. And before you move past it because it sounds obvious, I want to be very precise about what I mean and what the tradition means by bringing the word truth into your consciousness before a business deal. It does not mean, am I lying? Most people entering a negotiation are not lying. They are selecting. They are framing. They are presenting the version of the facts that serves their position most effectively. And this is considered normal. It is considered skillful. The art of negotiation, in the conventional framework, includes the management of information, not saying things that are false exactly, but not saying all of what is true either. The tradition has a very specific name for this practice, and a very specific warning about it. The warning is not moral in the abstract sense. It is functional. It is this: a deal built on selective truth has a structural weakness that will eventually express itself. The Talmudic teaching is explicit. A transaction in which one party has information the other party would have found material to their decision, and that information was withheld, carries what the tradition calls a chazaka of instability, a presumption of fragility. The relationship does not hold at the same depth as a relationship built on complete transparency. The partnership does not sustain under pressure the way a partnership built on full mutual information sustains. And in the long career of a serious builder, not a person who wants one good deal, but a person who wants a life of deals that compound and build on each other. The instability of a transaction founded on selective truth is not a theoretical problem. It is a practical one that shows up again and again in the way that promising business relationships mysteriously fail to develop the depth and loyalty they seem to promise at the beginning. Speaking the word emet before you enter a negotiation is not a vow of total disclosure. It is a question. It is asking yourself, is there anything I know that this person needs to know in order for this transaction to be genuinely mutual? Is there anything I am withholding, not for legitimate strategic reasons, but because I am afraid that full transparency will weaken my position? And if the answer is yes, if there is something the other party would find material, the teaching is clear. Say it. Because the deal you lose by saying it was a deal with a crack in its foundation, and the relationship you build by saying it is a relationship that can sustain something real. The second word, tzedek, justice, fairness, the right proportion between what each party gives and what each party receives. And here is where I am going to say something that I know will create friction in some listeners, because it runs against the fundamental operating assumption of most commercial negotiation. The goal of a deal, in the conventional framework, is to get as much as possible while giving as little as possible, to extract the maximum value from the other party while retaining the maximum value for yourself. This is considered not just acceptable, but admirable. It is called being a good negotiator. The tradition calls it something else entirely. The tradition calls it the behavior of a person who is optimizing for the wrong thing. Not because generosity is a virtue in the sentimental sense, because the mathematics of long-term commercial relationships are not the mathematics of single transactions. A person who extracts maximum value from every deal, who leaves the other party with as little as they could possibly accept, is a person who has, in each of those transactions, created someone who will not return, who will not refer, who will not advocate, who will, at the first available opportunity, find someone else to deal with. The great Jewish merchant families whose commercial networks survived across generations were not known for extracting maximum value from each transaction. They were known for something the tradition calls Kiddush Hashem in commerce, the sanctification of God's name through ethical business practice, which expressed itself practically as fair dealing, as margin that left the other party genuinely satisfied, as prices and terms that were perceived as just by the person receiving them. This was not charity. This was the mechanism by which those networks became networks, by which a single transaction with a satisfied counterpart became a relationship, and a relationship became a referral, and a referral became a reputation, and a reputation became a business that the next generation could inherit as a going concern rather than a spent force. Speaking the word tzedek before you enter a negotiation is asking yourself, is what I am about to propose genuinely fair? Not barely acceptable to the other party, fair, proportionate, the kind of terms that, if the other person described them to someone they trusted, that person would say, that sounds like a good deal for both of you. If the answer is no, you have information you need before you walk in. The third word, shalom, peace. And I want to be extremely precise about this one, because shalom is perhaps the most misunderstood word in the Hebrew language when it is encountered outside its original context. Most people hear shalom and think of it as a greeting, or as the absence of conflict, or as a feeling of pleasantness. That is not what shalom means in the tradition. Shalom means completeness, wholeness, the state in which all the parts of a thing are present and in right relationship with each other. A deal that has shalom is not a deal where nobody is angry. It is a deal where nothing essential is missing, where all the terms that need to be addressed have been addressed, where the relationship between the parties has been fully articulated rather than left to assumption. One of the most common sources of business failure in the tradition's analysis is not fraud, not incompetence, not bad luck. It is incompleteness. The agreement that everyone thought was clear and that nobody wrote down carefully. The term that both parties assumed they understood the same way and did not. The relationship that was warm enough at the beginning that the hard conversations seemed unnecessary, until the hard situation arrived and there was no framework for navigating it. Shalom in a deal means completeness. It means that before you finalize anything, you have asked every question you are tempted not to ask, because asking it would seem to suggest you do not trust the other party. You ask it anyway, not because you do not trust them, because shalom requires it, because a deal with missing pieces is a deal that will eventually be defined by those missing pieces rather than by the parts that are present. Speaking the word shalom before you enter a negotiation is asking yourself, am I willing to ask everything this deal requires me to ask, even the uncomfortable questions? Am I willing to stay in the conversation until it is complete, rather than settling for a version of complete that feels good enough? Because good enough is not shalom. And a deal that is not shalom is a deal that carries its incompleteness forward into the relationship it creates. Now I want you to take a breath, because the fourth word is the one that requires something from you that the first three do not. The first three are about your conduct, your honesty, your fairness, your thoroughness. The fourth word is about something deeper than conduct. It is about the fundamental orientation of your will. And this is the one that separates the deal makers who are good from the deal makers who build something that genuinely lasts. The fourth word is bitachon, trust. And not trust in the other party, though that matters and the tradition has much to say about it. Trust in the source. Trust in the divine provision that the tradition teaches underlies all commercial activity. Trust that is specific and functional, and in the hands of the people who have genuinely internalized it, profoundly liberating in a way that produces, paradoxically, better commercial outcomes. Here is what I mean. A person who enters a negotiation in a state of scarcity, in the internal conviction, conscious or not, that this deal is the deal, that if this does not come through, something essential is lost, that the outcome of this specific transaction determines something large and frightening, is a person whose judgment in that negotiation is compromised, not because they are weak, because the nervous system under the stress of scarcity does not perform the same cognitive functions as the nervous system in a state of genuine security. It narrows, it shortcuts, it reaches for certainty rather than accuracy. It accepts terms that a calmer mind would scrutinize. It misreads signals because it is looking for reassurance rather than information. I have seen this happen to capable, intelligent, well-prepared people more times than I can count. They walked into a room ready and walked out having agreed to something they regretted. Not because they were outmaneuvered, but because they were negotiating from a position of internal scarcity that made the relief of any agreement feel preferable to the discomfort of holding out for the right one. Bitachon is the antidote, not naively, not as a way of pretending the stakes do not exist, but as a genuine theological and psychological reorientation. A declaration made with full intention before the deal begins that this specific transaction, however important it is not the source of my provision. The source of my provision is something that does not change with this outcome. This deal matters. I will pursue it skillfully and seriously. but my security does not rest on it. And from that position, from the genuine internal spaciousness of a person who is not negotiating from desperate need, everything changes. The perception sharpens, the patience extends, the willingness to walk away becomes real rather than tactical. And paradoxically, the person who is genuinely willing to walk away is the person who most rarely needs to. Because the counterpart in a negotiation feels security the same way they feel desperation. And they respond to it the same way everyone responds to someone who clearly does not need what they are offering, with respect, with seriousness, with an inclination to meet them rather than to press the advantage. Speaking the 4 words before a deal, emet, tzedek, shalom, bitachon, truth, justice, completeness, trust, takes perhaps 30 seconds. Spoken silently before you walk in, or spoken quietly to yourself in the car on the way, or written in a small note you carry. The method is yours. The words are ancient, and the people who carried them into every business interaction they entered were not carrying a prayer in the passive sense. They were carrying a recalibration, a complete internal reset of the 4 conditions that the tradition identifies as the determinative conditions for a transaction that builds rather than erodes. Honesty that creates depth, fairness that creates loyalty, completeness that creates durability, and trust that creates the spaciousness from which genuine judgment operates. 4 words, the compressed wisdom of 2,000 years of the most rigorously examined commercial ethics on earth, available to you, before every deal, starting with the next one. I have assembled a complete resource, a full architecture of the tradition's teachings on commerce, negotiation, partnership, and financial relationships that goes far deeper than what any single teaching can cover. It is in the description below this video. If today opened something in you, if you felt one of these 4 words land with specific weight because you recognized in it something that has been missing from the way you have been doing deals, go there. The full framework is waiting for you. Now I want to hear from you. Of the 4 words, truth, justice, completeness, trust, which one do you most need to bring into your next business interaction? Tell me in the comments which word and why. I am not asking for a long answer. I am asking for an honest one. 1 word and 1 sentence. Because the person who can name what they need is already closer to having it than the person who cannot. If this channel has been giving you teaching that changes how you think rather than just how you feel, subscribe now. There is more coming, deeper than this. And the people who are here for the long work deserve to receive it when it arrives. And if today gave you something that will be in your mind the next time you sit across a table from someone whose yes or no matters to your financial life, press the like button. Not as a transaction between us, as a way of sending this teaching to someone who is about to walk into a deal unprepared, carrying nothing but their spreadsheet and their anxiety, who needs to hear these 4 words before they do. Emet, tzedek, shalom, bitachon. Take them with you. Let them work. May every deal you enter from this day forward be entered with truth in your mouth, justice in your terms, completeness in your questions, and the deep, unshakable trust of a person who knows that their provision does not depend on any single transaction. May your handshake carry the weight of all 4. May the relationships your business builds be relationships that hold, through pressure, through change, through the long seasons that test everything built without a proper foundation. You were made for business that builds, not business that extracts. The tradition always knew the difference. Now so do you. Shalom.